Welcome to the Drum Chats podcast, where we're talking anything and everything to do with drums. Today's topic, tom mounting systems. Here are your hosts, Travis Davis and Dave Douglas. Hey everybody, you are listening to the Drum Chats podcast. Happy New Year. This is Travis, and I'm sitting in front of my computer screen, and I see Dave Douglas. Dave, how was your Christmas, man? And New Year's?
Yeah, it was all right. We had you did a lot of family things and made the rounds to my grandparents, and it's getting tough for them to make it out to all the events now. So made a special trip to see them, and that was really good. What about you? You did a little traveling, huh?
Yeah, I flew back to Houston and hung out with my parents and my siblings and did the whole, saw the grandparents as well. And so
cool.
It was nice, really low key.
That's good.
It was good, man. It's a lot warmer down there than it is in Nashville, and I'm sure even warmer than it is in Ohio. How cold is it there?
Yeah. It's like 40 today.
Okay.
It's not very Christmassy. Normally up here in the north, we like to and expect to have a white Christmas, but we had, it had a couple little dustings of snow here this year. We really only had in Cleveland one or two actual snows, and that's been weeks since that happened. I don't know. Not super Christmassy. It doesn't feel that way without snow, but
Of course.
Yeah, it's all good though.
Well,
it's all good.
We are getting into something kind of cool that both of us talked about a few days ago. Tom mounts. Let's just dive right into it. What kind of tom mounts? I know you've experimented with a couple of different designs per se.
Mm-hmm.
What have you generally gone with as far as mounting your rack tom, for instance?
No, I've got all kinds.
Yeah,
I have most of the available types. But I'm a big fan of a lot of the free floating kind of stuff, and we'll get into that later. But that does tend to be my favorite. But it's not on all of my kits. But a couple of them. What about you?
I've experimented with all of them, as I think you do when you start playing drums, where your rack toms are mounted into your kick drum, and
Boo.
then and then went to the suspended one with the rims mounts. But right now, I typically stick with putting my rack tom into a snare basket.
I see. Yeah, a lot of people do that. I've never been a fan, but it looks cool. And that's half the battle,
Yeah, that's part of playing, is just looking good.
It's a part of it for sure. Yeah. But yeah, there's a bunch of different kinds. I guess we kind of just mentioned the three types that I would kind of throw them all into. All the different ones that are out there kind of fit into those three categories, like fixed mounting, where it's actually a bracket of some kind that attaches to something on the drum and holds it.
Yeah.
And then there's the basket, like you talked about, putting it on a snare stand. It's a tom on a snare stand. And then we've got our free floating kind, which attempts to isolate the drum, the shell, from the mounting system in some way so that it can resonate more freely and it's not restricted by, being actually physically attached in it's obviously is attached in some way, but they try to isolate it with rubber gaskets and all kinds of things like that. So there's a bunch of different mounting systems like that, the variations out there.
Right.
But yeah, let's dive into some of this fixed mounting systems first. And for me, when I think of that, and you mentioned right away putting your toms being mounted through into the bass drum, and I just think of Yamaha when I think of that. I guess Pearl too, right?
Yeah, I think Pearl has some of its series. I think some of the Masters series do that. And then some of their typical beginner kits that you get seem to have just a very simple mounting system for the rack toms. Where, people it feels like a lot of guys, they call them virgin kick drums, where there's no hole, there's no mounting hole there where it's
Yeah.
just clean. What we're talking about with these fixed drums is that there's actually a hole cut out where a bracket is mounted on top of the kick drum, and the tom arms that the toms come off of go straight down into the kick drum, and that's where they're supported. And also, I don't think all manufacturers do this, but like in the same way that they would do with the kick drum, some of those mounting systems will also have big holes drilled out of the shell, and the arm will go directly into the shell rather than suspended.
Yeah, I think that's what Pearl does, right? That's the one where it's
Pearl
just
is
like
known
the
for that,
tube.
yeah.
It's the tube, and there's a hole in the side of the shell. You know, obviously there's hardware. It's a metal piece, but
Right.
then there's a hole in that, and you just literally just slide your drum onto the end of the tube.
Yep.
And you know, tighten the wing nut or whatever, and go. That's what I think of when I think of a tom being mounted in a bass drum. But of course, that's not necessarily the case. All kinds of companies have mounting systems on the bass drums, or that option available, including DW and all kinds of custom ones. There's all the old school ones that are like old Gretsch and Ludwig kits have like the kind of banana rail, and that's attached to the kick drum and can be super cool. There's all different types, but yeah, the tube going directly into the shell of the drum, I think is pretty gross, but there's a lot of that out there. I don't know, but that's just a personal preference, but I'm not a huge fan of that. I feel like it's limiting also often in kind of the flexibility of where you can put your tom. It kind of, there's maybe fewer angles that you can monkey with it to fit into the spot that you want it to actually live,
Yeah. Well, and think too, like what that's doing to your kick drum per se, when you have this giant hole cut out of the shell.
Yeah. And it's interesting. We're talking about it in terms of the kick drum, but so often, we're dampening the kick drum and we're kind of trying to shorten that sustain.
That's fair. Yeah.
While it's definitely affecting the kick drum, I think it more so affects the toms than the kick. But you're putting all that strain on the kick drum. You're putting weight on there, and then you've got this big appendage sticking out of the top of your kick drum, and it's obviously affecting the way that the kick resonates. But
Right.
like I said, the kick resonating is not necessarily where we're gonna notice the huge difference. Difference there. It's really in the toms and in their resonance. If you have it mounted like that, or if you have it mounted in a basket or whatever, that's the resonance that I will be drawn to noticing that difference specifically in the toms.
Well, you make a good point about even the positioning too, where like you and I, our rack toms tend to be kind of off to the side of our kick drums because of maybe how low we have them positioned, or even how flat we may have them. It seems like when you have them mounted into the bass drum, you're really limited to just whatever space you have right above your kick drum.
Yeah, you definitely can't get them as low as I like to put them.
Yeah.
If there's been some like fly dates and things like that where I've played a backline kit, and that's what the kit is, and you got to figure out how to make it work. And I try to put it where I want it, and it's not. There's physically no way for it to go where I want it to go.
Yeah.
But I try to get it as low and as flat as I can, still making it like playable, but it's never going to be as far left as I want it to be. It's going to be more over the kick drum. But with those, actually, I tend to, and really I've only had that, it's not the Pearl style mounting system that I've had that experience with, but with like DW and things like that. And I'll actually take like the L arm and flip it upside down and mount it, put the tom in from below to try and get the tom even lower, as low as it can go, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just not a fan of, most of the time, I'm not a fan of mounting toms to a kick drum. But yeah. But it can be done in a cool way if it's more throwback,
Well, you made that point where there's the typical like expected to see like the bracket in the middle of the bass drum, but like you and I've talked about before, your most recent Battlefield kit, the blue one, you've got a throwback banana rail. And that's kind of a cool thing, like because of how classic of a design that is. And I think I think the mounting system that you have from the rail to your rack tom is a little updated from the way it used to be. But
yeah, for sure.
But
for sure, it's like a combination of like, it's like an homage to the old school banana rail from like a Gretsch kit or a Ludwig kit or something. But that's like an aftermarket Gibraltar piece of
Oh,
hardware.
okay.
And so it's got
Okay.
like all these different adjustments on it, and I can get the tom where I want it to go. Yes, it is mounted to the kick drum, but I think it looks freaking cool.
Which is funny because I
So-
think you and I had mentioned a few episodes back that you again didn't like having the rack tom mounted to the kick drum. But what was it
Yeah.
about that system specifically that made you think, if I use this, I could mount it to my kick drum?
It's just so like classic, and like it's just like all these like super old school kits
Yeah.
that you would see pictures of have that type of system where the tom is mounted. But of course at the time people didn't have two mounted toms there. It was always one tom. It was kind of off to the side.
Right.
And those old school brackets were like super limited as far as how you could adjust them. So the toms would be like at this weird angle, and it just has like a vibe to it, and I wanted to do something that was like a modern kit but had all these kind of throwback type of vibes to it. So
Yeah.
and in fact, I even played around with the idea of mounting my ride cymbal to the kick drum as well. But the kick drum, it's just like it's 6-ply and it's a 24-inch, and so it's just starting to get a little bit flimsy. And I use a pretty big ride cymbal,
Yeah.
and so it was gonna just be a ton of weight on the kick drum. And Colt Bridges, the dude who built it, was like, "Dude, I don't know, that makes me really nervous."
That's
so
like-
I was like, "Okay, cool, don't worry about it then."
That'd be like a salute to the old trap kits, like from swing bands
Yes.
back in the day.
Yeah,
A giant
totally.
curvy cymbal arm.
Yeah, dude, I just thought it would be really cool to have the tom off to the one side and the ride cymbal off to the other side, both coming off the kick drum. It would just
Yeah.
be like an interesting look for sure.
I'd like to
But
see you
we're
play
really
that.
getting away from tom mounts at this point.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Well, like we mentioned with Pearl, they're kind of known for having a 1-inch round arm that goes directly. So it's a pretty big arm.
Yeah, yeah, it's chunky for sure.
And that now they do have some of their kits, like some of their beginner and intermediate kits, where the arm goes directly into the shell. Pearl specifically. Then they also have the same kind of arm, but then they have like the free floating brackets, which we're going to get to in a little bit, where it's still the same idea with that big arm, but it doesn't penetrate the shell.
Right.
That rail or that bracket sits on the outside of the rail, in the same way Yamaha actually does the same, where they have those fixed arms where it's like still got a ball joint, but it's just got a little peg sticking out. But the same idea. Some of them go through the shell, and some of them sit on the outside.
And Yamaha does like the hex rail, right? Or the rod that's like a hex shape, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you?
Yeah,
Have you experienced much with the like how that affects your rack tom whenever the rods go into the shell? Because I know for me,
No,
it's
Yeah, I honestly have
subtle.
like so little experience with that type of mounting that I don't feel like I could actually speak to it very well.
Okay.
Because I don't own any kits that do that.
Gotcha.
So I guess I lied when I said I have all the types. I don't have all the types.
All the types except that one.
Yeah, I don't have the post directly into the shell type.
Well, let's go ahead and take a
So-
break, and then we'll come back and talk about leg mounts and baskets.
Yeah. Hey guys, it's Dave, and it's time for a story. So, Reliant K, we toured a lot, drove all around the country in circles and all over the place. And of course, we've done a lot of fly dates as well. And this is about one of those fly dates. Back in the day, of course, there used to be paper tickets that you would have. And even in the early days of Reliant K, like paper tickets were on their way out. So it was kind of rare to even have them. And if you did have a paper ticket, it was probably just a copy of, you could just go to the airport and check in again and, get another ticket, just like you can now, if you choose to. Although now I do feel like it's a little bit odd when I see people with paper in their hand, if they're not just checking in on their phone or something. I don't know. It just seems odd to me. Anyway, we were in Terrace, British Columbia. You should map this thing. Terrace, British Columbia. It's, that area of Alaska that kind of comes down along the west coast, coming south out of the main chunk of Alaska. And it's the little skinny part that's along the coast with all the islands where Juneau is and all that kind of stuff, right? So Terrace is actually quite close to that. So I don't remember how many miles offhand, or I don't know, but it's not too far from Alaska. So it's, you know, it's a long ways away out on the west coast and pretty far north. And we had a show in Terrace, and then we were going to be doing some sort of a media day in, I think it was Orlando. It could be Atlanta, but I'm pretty sure it was Orlando, because I remember thinking that these two locations could not get much further apart. It's like 5,500 miles apart or something crazy, you know? And so we had this flight, and it was going to be super long, and of course flying to the east, so we'd like lose time. So it's basically whatever it was going to be. It was going to be like a 5 or 6 hour flight or something, and then you end up losing like 3 hours as well. So it's just like chews up your whole day and everything else. And it was going to be this media day, and then it was so you would just go from like room to room in a hotel or in some sort of a convention center to booths. I don't know what this one actually was. And as it turned out, I never would find out what it was because I didn't go to it. Matt Hoops lost his paper ticket, and we discovered this day of the flight. So I think the media day was the following day. And it was like, we're like getting ready to go to the airport, and Hoops cannot find his paper ticket. And whatever, it seems so old fashioned now, but it could not be reissued. It was like, well, if you don't have the paper ticket, you don't get on the plane, you know? And so Hoops had no way to get there that day. And for whatever reason, I don't know why we couldn't just like purchase another flight, or maybe the deal was that it could be reissued, but it had to be the next day or something like that. I don't know exactly what the details were, but it turns out he was not able to get on that plane. And so I decided to not let Mr. Hoops spend the day alone in Terrace, British Columbia. So I said, you know what, I'll sacrifice and I'll stay here in beautiful British Columbia with Matt Hoops, and we'll just have a day off and we'll hang out, and you guys can go to Orlando and talk to all kinds of media and be shuffled here and there and telling the same stories over and over and things like that. So I went ahead and did that. I gave up my spot. And I gotta say, it was a nice little day off, if I do remember correctly, but we certainly did not do anything productive. And then we got on a plane the next day and met the guys in some other city, and I'm sure we played a show that day. But yep, that's Hoops and I hanging out in Terrace, British Columbia. Back to the show, guys.
All right, everyone, we're back, and again, we're talking about mounting systems on different toms. And typically, it seems like with mounting systems, everybody kind of goes immediately to rack toms. Because there's so many different options with rack toms, but a lot of guys don't really even think about the different mounting systems for floor toms. And I know I've seen some where the floor tom is basically suspended on like rims mounts in the same way a rack tom would be just off the floor on the right. And I know some guys complain about them like bouncing too much, where they'll just kind of wobble because of how big they are. But two of the most interesting ones, one of them being... I say interesting, leg brackets, or legs in general, I think are most common to see where the bracket is drilled directly into the shell and is mounted directly to the shell, so the shell is sitting on these legs. But then there's also baskets that the floor tom will actually sit down in this basket that's mounted to the tension rods, and then on that basket, the legs are mounted. The legs are mounted to that basket, and then the basket is mounted to the shell. If I said that correctly.
I think so. And when you're saying basket, you're just referring to like almost like a faux rim, right? Just like a circle of metal that's just like it's hovering around the outside of your drum.
Right. Yeah.
And that has like the rubber gaskets the tension rods go through that. So it's like your drum is just sitting on these rubber bushings, right? Yeah. That are attached to this this metal ring, and then the legs themselves are attached to that. So it's really just kind of floating on these, the rubber bushings.
Right.
And I actually have that on one of the Battlefield kits that I have, a brown one. And I really like that a lot. The hardware, it's a little bit cumbersome because like all the legs have like, you can adjust where the leg is on it, which is actually kind of nice because depending how you set up your drums, you might have an issue with maybe where the kick drum pedal is versus, your floor tom legs or the same thing with other stands that are on that side. So you can actually move where the legs are because they're not fixed in a position on at least the system that I have.
Oh,
on
that's
that
cool.
kit.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so you can move around where the legs are. Obviously, there's 3 legs, so you can't get them too far off.
Yeah.
But you can move them around a little bit, a few inches, no problem.
That's cool.
But I like that a lot. But it is a lot of moving pieces and whatnot. But that doesn't seem to be a deterrent for me. And I had that kit on the road for years, getting set up and tore down every day, and never really had any issue with it. Just pop the legs out and slam it into case and. Yeah, it was great. I really like that a lot.
Cool, man. I've never.
And then actually, the other thing is that before I had that kit out on the road, I was using this red DW kit, and with that one actually had the DW like floating system on it. You know how they have like their rims mount kind of system.
Yeah.
For the rack toms, my floor tom on that kit actually used the same thing. It was just a 14 by 11 floor tom. So it's a small floor tom, and it was rack mounted, it was on an L bracket, and it had that same rims type of mount on it. So that was like a floating type of system as well on that one.
Okay.
But most of the time on DW floor toms, you see the rod that just fits through a piece of hardware that's screwed into the side of the shell. That's the normal thing on a DW kit anyway, even if the rack tom has the rims type mounting system on it to try and isolate it. The floor toms typically don't have that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting how DW does that. It's like a mix of the two,
Yeah, and I think that that I can think of, they're the only ones who have those kind of, like you said, it's kind of a blend of their own thing and the way that the whole free floating aspect, I guess, but that it goes around the lugs rather than via a gasket with a tension rod through.
Yeah, and that's an interesting system too because it's a little bit more fixed, like a little bit more solid feeling
Kind of hugs
than
the shell,
most.
right?
Yeah, than most of the types that are trying to be free floating and isolating.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel quite as loose, like it's kind of floating around and kind of wobbling. It's definitely held in place a little bit more, but it still has the rubber gaskets that go around the lugs.
Right.
And so it is isolating, but it feels a little bit snugger than the other ones. More snug. I don't know if snugger is a word.
I don't think it is. But I can see how that would also help even with the tuning aspect, because my kit came with rims mounts with those gaskets for the tension rods for the rack tom, and the rims don't really contour the shell perfectly. So there's pressure against the tension rods from the gasket because it just kind of flexes out.
Interesting.
Based on the shape of the rim itself. And so whenever you're tuning, you're kind of threading against the gasket also, so you don't get an accurate feel of how loose the tension rod is.
That's a bummer.
But what I've also wondered too with rims, and the thing that I do like about the DW ones, if I were to suspend, is that with the rims mounts, your tom is hanging its weight off of its tension rods, basically against those gaskets, and then the DW.
Well, it's really the weight is on the rim of your drum. That's where it's hanging.
But
there's
true.
definitely
I guess that's most of it.
But yeah, that's where the weight is definitely going to be. But yeah, especially like what you just talked about, there's definitely contact between the tension rod and the rubber gasket. but the weight's really on the rim, you know,
Okay.
like you're holding it with your fingers on either side of the rim, you know, or you know, on the top rim of your drum.
Well, then in that same way, then whenever it almost seems like with that, since it's resting against the rim, then
Yeah.
if you tune your tom before it's suspended and then you suspend it, well, now that rim is pushing up against your hoop and your head and affecting your
Yeah,
tuning immediately. Whereas with the DW one, it's not touching your hoop or head at all.
Right, it's on the lugs, which are themselves fixed to
Right.
to the shell of the drum. Yeah, so you're not affecting the head, because on that rims mount, you are definitely putting pressure on the bottom of the top rim, and that of course is what holds the head on. So
Right.
I would imagine, you know, I've never thought about it in that way, but I can't imagine that affects it much. But it's certainly the weight of the drum. You know, it's that much different. Whatever that contributes to the tension on the head. So it would actually, I suppose, it would loosen it. You know.
Yeah.
But it's not like the tension rods are gonna unwind because of it or anything like that. I don't know. I don't know how that
No.
would actually affect the resonance of the drum though.
I don't know. I don't know. I think about it and I can picture it in my head, but I don't know how it would.
I can't imagine it like
what
in
the
practice
difference
it
would be.
actually. Yeah, I can't imagine in practice it would actually be different. But in theory, or maybe if you were gonna like take some very accurate measurements, you know, that I'm
Yeah.
sure there probably
really
is a
precise.
difference. But in practice, I'm not sure it really makes a difference.
Yeah.
I don't know though.
No, I think I agree with you because it might be a subtle difference to where miking it up close or something, you might be able to pick up a change in the frequency or in the vibration or something. But
Nah. Nah. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I just can't imagine that being the case, but I'm sure there is some difference, but yeah, probably awfully subtle.
yeah,
Awfully subtle. But the other thing, you know, you mentioned that you put your rack tom in a snare stand, right?
yes,
So what about that? Like, I have never been a fan of that because it just kills resonance. It just, I feel like it really just kind of destroys a rack tom. But you definitely have to tune it differently because it sounds way different. Like if you hold it by the rim and hit it,
for
and
sure.
then you put it in the snare basket, it sounds way different.
Definitely.
And so you definitely have to like tune it appropriately or put it in there and like make it work for the environment that you've just created for it. But yeah, but that's been a thing that you've done. And do you have like ways that you combat that? Do you just like, what's your situation when it comes to tuning and resonance in the rack tom, putting it in the snare stand?
Well, for one, I've noticed that a lot of guys tend to, even with their snares as well, they tend to over tighten the snare basket to where it's actually like hugging the shell. And I don't do that. I get it just enough to where it's just surrounding the hoop, but the shell is just sitting in there and I could easily lift the shell out of the basket and not take the stand with me. Because for one, if you do that, you're clamping down on the shell and you're compressing the shell. So that's going to change
Yeah.
your tone already. One of the things that I'm wanting to do is buy, I hate that they named it this, but this product called booty shakers.
Okay.
Which are
okay.
they're like foam L, like they look like L's, and you strap them around the end of the arms in your snare basket.
Okay.
And they're
So
made
it sits on foam then?
right, and so
Cool.
it elevates it like a half inch off of the basket, and being that it's foam, it's soft enough to where it has enough give to where it's
Yeah.
not just fixed and your drum is just sitting against it. It's actually kind of floating, but still in the basket. And I haven't played with that yet, but I've seen videos and comparisons, and I've met guys who use them, and they say it's night and difference with how much resonance you get.
Really? Dude, you should
Mm-hmm.
just grab a piece of foam and just cut some chunks out and just try it, right?
Well, it's funny you say that because I think before Booty Shakers came out, gosh, I hate saying that name, but it's just so why. But DW had their, I think it was their piccolo snare stand, or they actually
Okay.
they had an actual tom snare stand where there was the same idea where they had like these very thin like foam strips that just kind of on the bottom of the basket in that little bracket where we're talking about on the end piece of the snare stand, they had these little loops. They just kind of looped up and looped back, and there were two of them, and that would essentially do the same thing where it would suspend your tom up in the air. So I think the best way of using a snare stand for your tom is to have some kind of suspension coming off of the bracket, such as foam or whatever they're using, just to keep it from resting against such a solid piece of metal, basically.
Right.
That's the only remedy that I've heard of that can help with your resonance.
Yeah, and that certainly makes sense. I think both those things don't over tighten or really don't tighten it much. Like just kind of get it around, like set it in there in the basket and let it kind of have a little bit of play in there. You know, I always like with my snare, I really like to be able to grab my snare and like pick it up and take the whole stand with me and stuff. You know, it just makes it easier for getting things on and off the stages and things like that. But the reality is it's probably not helpful to the sound.
Right.
So yeah, that's an interesting point for sure. And actually I did see Gauger Percussion. I think they're the ones who make rims mounts, right? Gauger?
Sure.
Yeah. You don't know.
I don't know.
But
I'm
anyway,
not sure. I've always heard rims, but
yeah, and I don't know what their association is, but I think they may be the actual manufacturer.
Okay.
They make this thing called a flex frame for like basket style situations like you're talking about. And it's actually some sort of a system that you attach to like the bottom rim, or maybe it's some sort of augmented piece that you put on that rim, and it's supposed to do that same exact thing you're talking about, where it actually allows the drum to float even though it's sitting in a basket. It really tries to again isolate the two pieces of equipment, the shell and the drum, from the stand. So that's something to check out. Flex Frame, it's called.
Okay.
And they have something the same type of idea, but it's for floor tom legs. You can have a traditional floor tom with your three legs going down, but to isolate it from the floor. So even though the mounting system on the floor tom legs, you have the mounts directly drilled into the shell,
right?
But then on the very bottom of the legs, they have these things called flex tips, and it's actually like a spring.
I'm looking at that.
Is on the bottom of every leg. And so then there's like, the rubber foot with a spring in it, and then your floor tom leg is in that. So it's actually sitting on springs to try to isolate it from the floor so it can resonate more freely, like it's hanging almost.
Yeah. So I'm looking at that spring mount thing. And, and you said, when you mentioned the flex frame for the snare stand isolation, that actually made me think too, another good thing that I've seen some of these session drummers do is, rather than say like a triple flange hoop, rather than setting the whole thing inside of that L arm, I don't know what else to call it in the bracket, what they'll do is they'll actually they'll rest the flange of the hoop on those arms instead.
The part that's vertical, like a normal snare stand, you kind of have like the very end, it's like an L, and there's usually like a rubber piece that fits over it, so it's sitting on rubber, right? Yeah. And you've got your three arms that come out and they go vertical there. Yeah, so that vertical part, it's just the top of it that would be actually contacting the rim, and it just kind of sits on top of there. And it's a little bit trickier, obviously, to because you got to get it to the right spot so it doesn't fall all the way in and rest on the bottom of that snare basket.
Right.
But that's actually what I do with my snare itself.
Oh, okay.
I've done that with my snare for like forever.
I'm gonna have to try that with my snare. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and it's actually I found that it was pretty noticeable how it sounded. I felt like it really opened. Yeah, I really felt like it opened it up. And then when I drop it back down inside of the snare basket, all the way, I felt like it sounded a little bit choked. It was pretty interesting, the difference. You wouldn't think it'd be that much of a difference, but I felt like when I've messed around with it, it certainly seemed like there was a difference. And so I've done it that way for like 15 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right on, man.
Well, maybe we should take another quick little break, and why don't you give us a tip?
Hey everybody, this is Travis, and I'm bringing you the tip of the day. Have you ever heard of keyholing? It's when the hole in your cymbal that the cymbal stand goes through starts creating a different shape. The way that this happens is when you don't have a cymbal sleeve on your cymbal stand to keep this cymbal from rubbing against metal. Metal to metal contact is going to do that to your cymbal, and it's not something you want. And so the tip today is to make sure you replace your cymbal sleeves whenever they're broken, and carry some extra ones with you. Almost every cymbal stand out there you can buy replacement parts for. I know even Gibraltar makes general use parts that can be used on different kinds of cymbal stands. And so my advice is just make sure you have some of those, because when those break, it will affect your cymbal over time. Metal to metal contact is never good. So that's it. Now let's get back to the show.
Hey guys, we are back, and that was a fantastic tip from Travis.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we really hit on a lot of the free floating stuff already. But let's just maybe touch on that again. I'm a big fan of like the rims mounts and anything that's trying to isolate the drum from whatever it is mounted on. Really a big fan of anything that's attempting to do that.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies make different styles of those type of rims. I have a lot of experience with the rims mounts. I have a lot of experience with the DW system. What do they call it? They call it like the suspension tom mount. I think it's just that STM or something like that. And I think there's a PDP version of it as well that's a little bit different, but I think that one maybe goes around the tension rods instead of around the lugs on the PDP one. Is that right?
They do have a PDP one. The PDP lugs are like where DW, they're very round. PDP, they're kind of oval shaped. So they still they still have that. It's just a different shape.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, and then I kind of mentioned a couple of those Gauger percussion, which is a pretty like unknown. That's certainly not a big name. But they make a lot of really cool stuff. So definitely check out Gauger percussion. But then some of the other like kind of big players, Tama and Pearl, also make mounting systems that are floating, you know. And I don't have any experience with those. Do you?
I don't. All my hardware is all DW. I've never really ventured into the Gibraltar or the Tama. I've messed with some in setting up some of these kits at Drum Paradise and have seen them, but don't really have much experience as far as playing them and maneuvering them to my standard, I guess.
Yeah. Tama has one they call the Super Resonant Mounting System. And it seems pretty cool. It's like there's only 3 contact points on the drum, but I think it's a special rim. It's actually a rim that you have to put on your drum. Or buy a drum kit, a Tama kit with this mounting system. And it's almost like, you know, like the rims that have holes for the tension rods to go through, of course, right? And there's extra holes where the Super Resonant mounting system attaches. So it's a very specific thing. Like it's like a whole, you know, it's a whole bunch of hardware. But it seems like a cool system if you have it. But you're probably not going to get that aftermarket. You're probably going to go ahead. If you have that system, it's going to be because you bought a kit that has those rims on it already and whatnot. And then the Pearl one, I think they call it the ISS, Integrated Suspension System. And that one just attaches to like a triple flange hoop.
Yeah.
And I think they have another one, the OptiMount, that's like similar to the Tama one I talked about, but has 4 contact points, 2 on the top rim and maybe 2 that it kind of rests against or something on the bottom.
Yeah, right.
But there's a ton of them out there, and they're all a little bit different. But again, the whole goal is to isolate the drum from whatever it's mounted to so that it can resonate more freely. And some of them, I'm sure, do it a little bit better than others.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of options out there to check out, and some of them are things that you can buy aftermarket and throw on the kit that you have.
Right.
So definitely worth checking out.
As soon as you mentioned this super resonant mounting system, one of the drummers that I've helped set up for, his name is Lonnie Wilson. He plays Tama, and if you're looking at this picture or a picture of a Tama system, on a lot of the Star Classics, where their hoops or the mounting system, like the mounting rims that they use, are actually shaped to the shell and to the counter hoop, so they're like a perfect match to them, rather than with like rims mounts where they might bend into shape or they might have a little flex. These are like molded for this shell to where they're very rigid, kind of like the DW ones where they kind of hug the shell. With this super resonant mounting system, Lonnie Wilson's kit has it, and it's got like a quick lock release on the mount where the arm goes in. There's like a switch. There's a switch on the mount when the arm goes into it that you like flick this little black switch over and it locks it in place. And then if you flick that off, it's undone, rather than like doing a wing nut and tightening down on it or something. There's like a quick release system on it.
To get the toms on and off?
Right, on the arm.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
It's pretty cool.
So it just makes like setting up and tearing down a little bit quicker or a little bit less annoying?
Yeah, and they do it on their floor tom legs as well.
Oh, that's cool.
The memory lock itself is necessary because the way that it's shaped, it's not tightening down on just a little 10.5 millimeter arm. That arm that's going up in there is actually like an inch wide, like that fits specifically for this mounting system, so that even their mounting legs on their toms, the memory lock also goes right up into the brackets on the toms and has this quick locking system. So it just eliminates the use of wing nuts as far as what is mounted on the shell.
Whoa, okay.
If that makes sense.
That's cool.
That's pretty cool though. Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to follow, and it sounds like it makes sense. And there's so many different like little gadgets and like little design things that companies come out with. So if it seems like it's working, and it doesn't complicate things and it can actually make it quicker, then heck, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, dude.
I'm for it. Yeah. And you mentioned a 10.5 millimeter, which is like one of the sizes of like that L brackets or whatever kind of bracket that a lot of the tom hardware will fit on. And I don't know if that is, I don't know what companies use 10.5. I know DW uses the larger one that's like 12.7 millimeter.
Something like that.
It's a larger, I mean, DW, most of their hardware, it's like a little bit heavier duty than a lot of companies.
Overdone,
Yeah, and I love DW hardware. I think it's fantastic. But yeah, their L brackets and whatnot mounting stuff is 12.7 millimeters. And we didn't mention at all about kind of some of the different brackets. It's maybe a little bit outside of this discussion right now, but I'm definitely I talked about Pearl and how sometimes it was like limited as far as where you could actually put your tom because of like the teeth locking system, and then you've got this tube going into your drum and everything else, but I'm a big fan of the L brackets with like the ball mount on them, huge fan of like a ball and socket, I guess, is what they call it. So it's like your shoulder joint or something.
Right.
I don't know why I said that. It's ball and socket, but there is one really cool that I just discovered earlier today when I was looking up a couple things, and it's a Gibraltar one, and Gibraltar makes like a bazillion pieces of hardware. It's like their thing, but they make this one, and it's called the Ultra Adjust, and it's like a ball and socket mount for your tom. But it's crazy. It can move like any direction. You should definitely check it out. Gibraltar. I think it's like SCLGUA, but just look up Ultra Adjust. Okay. It's kind of crazy, but it's definitely super cool. And you can, if you attach a drum to that, you can put it in any direction, 360 degrees, like wherever. It's pretty cool. Because even the DW stuff, you've got a ball and socket, but you still have to have like that mounting piece facing the right direction. Right. And then it has like kind of unlimited movement within like a certain window of space, right? But this Gibraltar Ultra Just one, like you could put it anywhere. It's pretty cool.
Nice.
Definitely check it out. So yeah, maybe not entirely related to this, but it's one of those,
for sure.
It's like a stupid piece of drum hardware that made me excited. So yeah, I wanted to share it real quick anyway.
Well, if any of you guys listening have any experience with any of the, it's a lot of any's in that sentence, with any of this gear that we're talking about, any of these mounting systems, feel free to shoot us an email or message us on our social media. You can also, on Instagram or Twitter, you can hashtag drum chats and we'll make sure to see your pictures. We'd love to see what you guys are using. If you don't have our emails, you can reach us at travis@drumchats.com, dave@drumchats.com. And again, all of our social media is instagram.com/drumchats. Same with Twitter, same with Facebook. And make sure you go check out our website, drumchats.com, and subscribe to our newsletter. That way you can find all of our stuff on our website. Also, you guys are probably listening to this on iTunes or SoundCloud or whatever you might be listening to the podcast to. But Dave, I don't know if I told you this. We are also posting the episodes on our YouTube channel now. So you can actually go back and listen to the episodes. If you're already on YouTube, you can check them out there. And we now have a playlist for all of our tip of the days and tips of the day and our story time. You can go, if you don't want to listen to the whole episode, but you're like, hey, I remember Dave told this one story, you can actually go on our website or YouTube channel and find that specific story and listen to it as much as you want. Make it easier for you guys.
As much as you want, just over and over. just that
over
story.
and over and over and over. I know that's what I did.
That's great.
But Dave,
cool. Thanks for doing that.
Any final thoughts?
No, I don't think so. Like I said, I'm just a big fan of anything that's trying to isolate the drum from hardware. So I definitely lean that way, but if you're going for some sort of throwback thing, you're probably not going to have that type of situation, and that's okay because looking cool is also important. That's my wrap up.
Cool. Well, with that being said, guys, thanks for tuning in. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2019. And you're listening to the Drum Chats podcast, and we'll see you guys next time.
See ya.